Just a little bit of a background about this type of program. So Glendale Library Arts and Culture has recently started an initiative called Be the Change, which is the library's promise to build collective understanding of systemic racism, elevate the voices and stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and inspire our community to be the change through lectures, exhibits, and programming. Before we get started, I'm just going to let you all know that this program is being recorded, and it'll be made available from the library's website at a later time. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Sandra Garcia, our presenter for tonight's program on Dolores Huerta. Sandra is a secondary social studies teacher, social studies and Spanish teacher at Glendale Unified School District. And thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I thank you, Michael, for that. And thank you to all of you who took some time off your busy afternoons to be here with me, with us today. And I want to welcome you to this conference. As Michael informed us, we're going to be joining this conversation about the outstanding and amazing, incredible life of Dolores Huerta. And as you're going to hear me today, I'm going to keep talking about how incredible the life story of this woman is. And I have to start by telling you that I have a very ambitious plan today. And I didn't know this at the time when I started researching for this conference. I knew a little bit about Dolores Huerta, but it could have not even begun to scratch the surface of what I discovered through this conversation that we're going to have today. And I call it an ambitious plan because this woman is 92 years old, and she's still very active and very involved in the social justice movement. So, I mean, imagine trying to summarize the life of a 92-year-old woman, right? That's already a challenge. But if you talk about a woman like Dolores Huerta, a woman with a 65-year career in social justice, like, how do you do that in 60 minutes, right? So it was really challenging. I was sharing this with Michael, how I kept, I ended up with a 2-hour conference and I had to take parts out. And every time I took something out, it hurt because everything was so important and so amazing. And I really wanted you to know. So it was a challenge. So I decided to go ahead, because I'm just that ambitious, to go ahead with my plan. And the way I decided to do that is that, yes, we're going to talk about her life. We're going to talk about her achievements. But if there is something that I want you to take out of this conversation today, is this. And this is a quote by an author, Stacey Swords, but I think it really summarizes what I took out of this experience of learning about the life of this woman. I think the work she has done is just outstanding, but you cannot begin to understand how truly extraordinary her life work is if you don't understand the obstacles she had to overcome to achieve them. I think that's what makes her so special. And we're going to talk about that today. And the way we're going to do it, and again, this is my ambitious plan, right? So we're going to talk about Huerta's life. We're going to talk about her legacy. But equally important, we're going to talk about the concept of identity and what does Huerta's life and her legacy and the concept of identity has to do with us, has to do with activism. So this is my ambitious plan here. So I'm going to try to bring these 4 huge concepts. I can do a whole week course in each of these concepts, right? So I'm going to try to do those 4 concepts. I'm going to try to bring them together in one conference today. So I hope I can achieve that. And we're going to try it. And if we fail, we'll fail together. And I assure you that you're going to end up, anyways, just so amazed by the life of this woman. So let's start with the first of those concepts, right? Let's talk about identity. And I know that all of us have a working definition of identity. And how do I know that? Because I went into the internet and I found hundreds of definitions. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. Hundreds of definitions of identity. And I think that the majority of us have the idea that identity is how we define ourselves, right? The frame of reference by which we perceive ourselves. And you're correct. And usually this definition refers to our self-identity, right? What makes us different from the rest of the world. I am a good writer, I am tall, I am shy, I am good in mathematics, right? So we all have this concept of ourselves. But there is two more concepts about identity that I think we need to understand to fully grasp the story of Dolores Huerta. And the second of those definitions of identity has to do with culture. And this is how we identify that sense of belonging of a particular group. And it could be based on nationality and ethnicity, race, gender, religion, right? And we learn this identity for ourselves and others through traditions, through heritage, through language, norms, and customs that we get from the society around us. And this is a very important part of who we are. But there is a third definition of identity that is not very frequently discussed. And it's, I think, a very important one in the life of Dolores Huerta. And that is role identity. How you identify your particular role within that larger system, within that culture, within your nationality, within your race. What is your role, your responsibilities, where you see yourself fitting in this one part? As an example, I can tell you, I can identify as an educator, yes, but it is very different to identify as an educator, to believe, to know that every day when I'm in front of my students, I'm literally touching lives. I can literally transform someone's life by the lesson that I give or the things that I don't teach, right? So there are two very different concepts or ideas about identity. So one is, yes, the groups that we can, believe we belong to, but another one is very different. What sense of responsibility, what role do we think we play within that group? And this is going to be very important in the life of Dolores Huerta. So I wanted to start with that. And why start with identity? Because I want to talk about how identity is what is going to, it's our lenses through which we understand everything that happens around us, right? History is experienced through these lenses. And I want you to think about what lenses are you going to understand this conference today? What lenses do you use to understand the world around you? What is your race, your nationality, your ethnicity? What languages do you speak? What is your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, your status or class? What are your mental and physical abilities? What are your traditions and beliefs? I want you to ask yourself these things because, again, all these social constructs are going to determine the way you see your own history and other people's histories around you, right? Now I'm asking you a second thing to do with this concept of identity. I want you to think about how these social constructs, all of these elements of identity show up through Dolores Huerta. And I assure you, once we start, it is impossible to fully understand the impact of this woman without considering these elements of her story. That's why I wanted to start with them. So why talk about that? Oh, there's one more concept I have to go through before we actually start with her life, and just hang on with me. There is the concept of intersectionality. And what is intersectionality? The complex, cumulative way in which effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, classism, combine, overlap, or intersect. That's where the name comes from, intersect, especially in the experiences of lives or marginalized individuals or groups. And we have to know this concept because Dolores Huerta's life, her life's work, are the perfect exemplars of how women negotiate intersectional identities of gender, of race, of ethnicity, language, class, from places of marginalization. That's where she started. And they will use this and they will negotiate these identities to elevate themselves, as we're gonna see in her case, but also and which is an extraordinary example of this, to help elevate others. And that's what Dolores Huerta is going to do. And that's why it's so important to understand identity and intersectionality. And that's what it was the title of my presentation today. Now, Dolores Huerta was a woman who really, truly broke race, ethnicity, gender, class, and even religious barriers to become the Chicana Latino icon, one of the most important activists of 20th century and 21st century. And of course, even if you take away all of the things that I just mentioned, just to have this long and prolific career, right? A 65-year-old career in social justice. So we're gonna see how she's really gonna play with those roles and identities and how they're gonna clash and the life story of this woman. Now, so let's start with her life now. So this is Dolores Huerta and her daughters. This is a photo of her and her daughters. We're gonna learn a little bit more about her family situation, but I wanted to start with this example. This talk is related to Women's History Month, and I thought, what a better way to start talking about her life than with this picture. Now, Dolores Huerta was born, she wasn't born Huerta, was born Fernandez. And depending on the source that you read, some sources said that her parents divorced when she was 3, others said that when she was 5. The point is that she went to live with her mother. So she was raised by a single mother who worked in a factory, who worked really hard to save up money to become a business owner, a hotel owner, a restaurant owner, and who was all the time working to support her children. Her dad was actually a miner, and a lot of people don't know this, but the dad actually ended up running for a seat at the legislature of New Mexico, and he served there, I think, 1938. So he was an activist, and but she wasn't raised by him, and she was raised in another state. So I don't know how much that influenced her, but there is that. So she had the example of her father, and of course the example of this mother that, you know, was an independent woman, businesswoman, strong woman that actually was able to successfully raise her kids by herself. Now, as soon as Dolores Huerta was out of high school, she got married to her boyfriend, Rob Head. She was only 18 years old, common at the time, and she immediately had 2 daughters, and within 3 years, she was already divorced. So she was a 21-year-old woman with 2 daughters and divorced. And at the time, she's going to earn an emergency teaching degree, and she's going to start teaching English to farm work children. And there are several stories that talk about how she was just so taken aback by the suffering of her students, by the poverty, by all the need that she saw, that she couldn't do it anymore. She decided that she had to help them further. And she quit that job within 1 year, and she became involved in other areas. One of those areas was in 1955, where she joined this organization called the Community Service Organization, or the CSO. And in that role, and mind you, she was only like a 25-year-old woman with single mother with two kids. And she was encouraging Spanish speakers to participate in civic life, voter registration, supporting bilingual candidates to government, equal rights for the Latin community. She was really interested in stopping police brutality within the Mexican community. So she's very involved at this time, and she's actually very good at her job. So this calls the attention of the CSO national director, which was Cesar Chavez. And I think most of you know who he is, right? We have this holiday in California for him. And they both decide that they want to stop the roles at the CSO to establish a union in the state of California to help farm workers. So they're going to create this union called the National Farm Workers Association, NFWA. And Cesar, so they're co-founded this organization. Cesar starts to serve as the president and Dolores as the vice president. Now, During the time that she started working at the CSO, Dolores Huerta remarried. And she actually married a fellow organizer, Ventura Huerta, that's where her last name comes from. And she had 5 more children. So at this time, Dolores Huerta has 7 children. And unfortunately, her and her partner, her husband, didn't share the same ideas about marriage and the role of women within marriage. Dolores was very dedicated to her work. She had to travel often, and like this says, right? She was unapologetic about it. So her husband didn't agree with her, and they ended up divorcing in 1964. So just when she was starting this National Farm Workers Association, she's a twice divorced woman with 7 children, right? Starting a new union. And she had to move. She decided to move where the people that they were going to represent lived. So she packed most of her belongings and her family, and she moved to Delano, California. And around that time, another union reached out for help. They wanted to start a major strike that will unite Filipino workers with Chicano workers in the grape industry to boycott the grape industry to get better treatment for the farm workers. And they actually agreed to join. And they actually mobilized this boycott, the strike, and that involved thousands of workers across California. It's during this strike, and we're going to talk about it, but the strike lasted for 5 years. And it's during this strike that these 2 unions are going to become one, are going to merge, and they're going to form the United Farm Workers of America. Till this day, that's their name now, United Farm Workers of America, the UFW. And Dolores Huerta continued to be vice president, was the only female leader in that organization. Like I said, the strike lasted for 5 years, became a nationwide boycott. If you're familiar with it, it is told in multiple sources that about or over 17 million people got involved. They mobilized the whole nation they convinced them to stop buying grapes so that the farm owners, the businesses, agricultural businesses, will sit down and negotiate with their employees. So, and they did. They were successful for that. So the strike, the boycott was very successful, and so the union became stronger. Huerta served there for more than 3 decades, and in that role, let me tell you, she really transform agricultural practices. And we're going to talk about it in a few minutes, but she changed legislation, she changed the way people were doing activism, she changed feminism, she changed politics, and then her partner, right, that she started this organization with, dies in 1993. Cesar Chavez dies of natural causes, and many people thought that she was the next leader, and it just made perfect sense. She was the she co-founded this organization. She has dedicated 3 decades to it. She was there since the beginning. She's been Cesar Chavez's right hand. But we're going to talk about a little later why she is skipped. She's not chosen as the next president. And within a few years, she resigns her position. That same year that she resigns, she's selected to receive the Puffin Nation Prize. And it's really interesting because that prize just gives $100,000 to the person that gets it. There's no string attached. There's nothing they have to use the money for. She was already by then, a 60-something-year-old woman. She could have very easily, get that money, live a comfortable life. But what she did is that she established the Dolores Huerta Foundation. That's what she did with her money. And she continues to work there today. Her foundation continues to fight for social justice and equal rights and the rights of agricultural workers. They organized at the grassroots levels, which was her passion, always the people. They offer leadership opportunities for the community, leadership development, civic engagement, policy advocacy. So that's what she does. And I mean, just talking about this, right? And remember, I tried to summarize the life and work of this woman within a few minutes. So of course I skipped complete decades, but just looking at this, I want you to think about the extraordinary achievements, right? Co-founding the first national union of farmers in the United States, being one of the only women, being the only woman in the executive board, being one of the few women in all the US, you know, leading this type of organization. So that is extraordinary itself, winning that award, establishing her own foundation. That is just completely amazing. And anyone will be absolutely well recognized, right, by that stuff. But when you consider, and again, thinking about these classes, right, when you consider that Huerta did all of this after experiencing severe discrimination when she was younger, like being accused of cheating, because how can a brown woman, daughter of a single mother, be that smart? You must be cheating, right? Or seeing her brother being beat up because he was part of the Mexican group of suitors. She did this while being a mother of 11 children. She ended up having 11 children. And many a times she was a single mother during that time, right? She did this while working 18-hour days. She did this sometimes earning anywhere from $5 to $35, so forcing her to survive on donated food, on clothing and shelter. When you consider these things, I don't know about you, but her life and her achievements become, to me, in my eyes, 3 times even bigger than they already are, right? Now, her activism, her how much she advocated for the poor, for women, for families, for the environment, for the LGBTQ citizens and immigrants, it's just extraordinary, right? And I think we can all recognize that. However, this wasn't the case when she was doing this. Her contributions were not that recommended, and they came at a really high price. So again, think about all those accomplishments. Think about all the obstacles that we already discussed, right? But what happens when you add to those obstacles the fact that, for example, this almost 60 years old woman was beaten by the police so severely that 6 of her wrists were broken, her spleen was destroyed. She spent months recuperating. She was arrested 22 times for peacefully protesting. She was shot at, she was screamed at, she was sprayed with pesticides on purpose to try to harm her. Chemicals were thrown at her in anger for the work that she was doing. And by the way, just a fun side note, this picture, her 22nd arrest, was in 2019 when she was 89 years old, mind you, while she was still protesting for support caregivers and their recipients deserving a living wage. So just this in itself, right? It's pretty cool. I don't know about you, but I just find this incredible. So you have this woman that faced a lot of obstacles to be the person that we know today. Now, this is just falling short because I just give you a big summary, right, of her life. Again, a 10-minute summary of a lifetime. But let's just talk a little bit more about her work and trying to understand how impactful her work has been. Yes, we talked about how she co-founded the National Farm Workers Association. Then she formed the United Farm Workers Association. how she faced, ethnic gender bias, but still managed to negotiate major strikes, various contracts. She organized workers, advocated for for safer working conditions. And we're going to talk about it a little bit towards the end of the conversation about the work that she did in the elimination of harmful pesticides and how she fought for employment and healthcare benefits for agricultural workers. And we talked about she was the vice president of the UFW. And even though her work there almost spans 4 decades, yet, and this is one of the things that really impacted me, and it's great that we're having this conversation during Women's History Month. Yet, I want you to just take a minute and read this with me. And this again is from the author Stacey Sowards. And I'm going to talk a little bit more of why I'm using Sowards' work in my conversation. So it is surprising that her work for the UFW is not better known in both academic and public communities, given her lifelong commitment to farm worker issues and her extended working relationship with Cesar Chavez, dating back to the mid-1950s. While Cesar Chavez has become an established public figure for his work on behalf of farm workers, Dolores Huerta has received relative little attention in historical and rhetorical scholarship. Her status as Chicana Latina icon, as well as her role as the most important Chicana Latina activist of the 20th century, warrants much greater attention to her life stories, leadership experiences, and rhetorical legacy. Why am I using this author? Because through my research, I was very surprised by this. And mind you, I'm a history teacher. And as you can see, I'm an avid reader. My house is full of books. And I had never noticed this. I was looking for books to learn about the life of this woman, to do the research for this presentation. And I was so surprised to learn that there were only 2 books, 2 adult books written about Dolores Huerta. I was so taken aback. And Sowards is the second one. The other one is a reader from 2008, I think. But Stacey Sowards talks about how there is really not a lot of work about Dolores Huerta, her legacy, her role in this organization. So she tried to correct that, and she wrote this book. And of course, I had to verify whatever the author was saying. And I just had to do a quick search. Disclaimer, there are other books about Dolores Huerta, but if you look closely on them, all of them are for children. So there's a lot of even 4th graders, 5th graders, kindergarteners, but I only found the 2 books that the author claims. And this is her book. The other one is a reader. And I just had to do a quick search to find a bunch of Cesar Chavez's book. And that's her Sowards' point, that in many of these Chavez biographies or the histories of the UFO, Huerta is barely mentioned. And there was no full-length book about her. There's a film in 2014, and there is a woman playing the role of Dolores Huerta, but the film is titled Cesar Chavez, right? So it wasn't until Mario Garcia published this reader in 2008, and then Sowards publishes her recently. And then there is a documentary, and we're going to talk about it a little bit ahead, that Dolores Huerta receives some attention, or some deserved attention, right? So most of us have heard about the work of Cesar Chavez, but I don't think any of us has received with enough justice the role of Dolores Huerta. So I had to look further. I actually went into the United Farm Workers, and I wanted to see what I could find about Dolores Huerta, and I was shocked. I literally confirmed what this author was mentioning. Like if you can see here, right, in the research further, Cesar Chavez has even its own tab. I don't know if you will be able to see this, but I went into the history tab of the organization, and maybe you cannot read it, but in just the first page of the organization, right, because this is by chronological order, I found 9 mentions, direct mentions, like the story of Cesar Chavez, what is it, Cesar Chavez biography, education of the heart, Cesar Chavez in his own words. There's 1 mention of Huerta. This is the organization that she co-founded and gave more than 30 years of her life. I just want you to wrap your head around that. So this is the documentary that I highly, highly recommend. I ended up using parts of the documentary. I ended up using Source's book and a lot of museums and archives to complete this work. They're all linked in the slides. If anyone is interested, I can just forward this to you. But this is the synopsis that the documentary talks about. And in this documentary talks about how she's so much less known than her male co-founder, right, Cesar Chavez, and how her contributions have largely gone unrecognized. And they talk about how she was one of the most defiant feminisms of the 20th century, and how she continues to this fight at the time of this movie. She was 87. So really, she waited a lifetime to see her work recognized, at least in this one documentary, right? And so when this documentary was coming out, the other thing that I used a lot extensively was to listen to her interviews. So when this movie was about to come out, she was interviewed. And I had to include part of that interview. This is for the Time magazine. And the person interviewing her asks her, well, one of the main theses of this film is that you didn't get credit for the work you did to organize the farm workers. What did you think of that as the focus of the movie? Did you feel overlooked at that time? And she's asked this question, and her answer just like took me aback. It really did. This is her answer. I never felt overlooked because I didn't expect any kind of recognition. I think that's very typical of women. I have been acculturated to be supportive, to be accommodating, to support men in the work they do. We never think of getting credit or recognition or even taking the power. We didn't think in those terms. Of course, that is changing now, and there is a surge of women who are not only running for office, but getting elected. That could make an incredible amount of difference in our world. Why was she not recognized? Maybe because she not advocated for that recognition. Why? Because that was her role as a woman. She believed that was her role as a woman. The machismo that she suffered in that union is just incredible. And talking about identities, right? She did an outstanding work in that union while facing extreme source of discrimination based on her gender. She was the only woman. Think about this, if I have women in the audience. She was the only woman in this group of 10 men, 9 men, right? For many years, for more than a decade, the only woman. The organization has just had or elected its first woman to the role of president in 2018, I think. But for a long time, she was the only woman in that group. So she experienced a lot of machismo among her peers. And there's an interview I included here. This is from 2013. And they literally asked her, is there machismo in the union? And she was like, yeah, there was. I believe it was part of the culture, the male-dominated culture. Another part of the interview, she explains that this was not only in this union. The machismo, the male-dominated culture was everywhere, right? And she gives perfect examples of that. But for the purpose of time here, I'm just including this. And then they ask her again, right? But did you experience it in the union? And she gives this example that to me just illustrates both the machismo that she suffered and also the work that she did to transform that. And she tells how when she was there during the meetings or in the events, the men there, the board meetings, and the men in the board will make all these sexist remarks, these dirty jokes, you know, sexist jokes. And one day she started to jot down every single time they did it. So I guess at the end of the meeting, Cesar Chavez asks, does anyone have anything to say? And she goes, yes, I have something to say. Yes, during the course of this meeting, you guys made 58 sexist remarks. And she talks about how they were all shocked and how the next meeting she got them to 30 and then to 20, eventually to 2. And pretty soon, those sexist comments were gone. So she forced them to check themselves. She forced them to stop making these sexist jokes. And that's kudos to her, but I can only imagine, again, being the only woman and at this time in history and forcing this majority of men to stop that behavior that was so common. So it's not the only example. I had to take about 2 or 3 of them out of my presentation, but she truly experienced this. And let me tell you, so this was very interesting to learn. Dolores Huerta was not always a feminist icon. She not always fought for women's rights in themselves. When I was studying her life, I saw this transformation throughout this period of time. And this women's advocacy, she was asked about it. She was asked about it in this interview. And she says, was this a priority, you know, to deal, for example, with issues of sexual assault among female workers? And she openly says, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. And then she explains why. She says, like, well, look, and I'm gonna paraphrase here. There were not even toilets. These farm workers didn't have access to water. And I want you to understand that these people are working at the time 14-hour days in the sun, sometimes at 115 degrees sun, without access to drinking water, right? She talked about how difficult it was for women to use the toilet. There was no toilet, so they had to go by groups. And again, the sexual assault thing was very real for women in the fields because of how far away they are from everything else, and how they had to cover themselves with towels or blankets to be able to use to go to the restroom, right? And how demeaning this was. And so they asked her again, why? So the issue of sexual assault or violence at this workplace wasn't something that you could address. How can you start fighting for women's rights when these people don't even have a toilet to go on, right? So Huerta responds with the fact that about payment. That was their focus at the beginning of the work of the union. Like they're saying, these people are starving. They're earning 70, 90 cents an hour. This is below the living wage at the time. They couldn't get to increase the minimum wage to at least 50 cents an hour. So they're starving, that their pressing needs are to feed their family. So they were not thinking about women's rights at the time. So when they started this, they were not thinking about women's rights. So what were the goals of the organization when they started? And in Huerta's words, first of all, and very important to her story, it was about the stigmatizing the role of the farm workers. She talks about how at the time, these farm workers were really considered second-class citizens. There was a lot of stigma to this work. And this was largely because most of them were minority groups, many of them immigrants, many of them illegally here, many of them illiterate. And of course, they're having one of the worst paying jobs, one of the backbreaking jobs. So there was a lot of stigma around this work, and there was a lot of racial discrimination. So she talks about the working conditions, and just to read this is just heartbreaking, right? So they were not giving like basic human necessities like a toilet or water, but they were also given protective equipment. And these people are working at the time among crops that have been, bathed in pesticides, and they're breathing this stuff, and there's nothing to protect them. She talks about speed ups, and I had no idea of this. I don't know if you've ever read about this, but She talks about how one farm worker could have picked up to 4 tons of grapes in one day. One person, 4 tons of grape. That's what she calls the brutalization of the human body. And when these employees, if they ever dare to protest about the long hours or about the mistreatment of their employers, they will be fired on the spot. And which was worse, their names were given to all the other farmers around, so that person wasn't going to find another job. So they had to, and like women were sexually harassed, and the family couldn't say anything. The women themselves wouldn't say anything because, first of all, they will be blamed, and second, their families will lose their livelihoods. So they wouldn't say anything. So the conditions of these people were just incredibly brutal. So it is until Dolores Huerta is leading her the boycott, the Great Boycott. She moves on for a few years to New York to organize the people there. She mobilizes the Black community, the Puerto Rican community, which was amazing to see how they came together, and the feminist community. At the time, feminism was rising in New York, and there she meets this woman. And I think that is here, finding for the first time the supportive women of other, the supported voice of other feminist women, that Dolores starts to change her mindset, that she starts to find her power and her voice, that she decides to consciously fight gender discrimination within the farm workers movement. And it's going to be very visible. But again, this is up in 1988. So after she is beaten and she's put in the hospital, she takes a 2-year leave of absence from the United Farm Workers, and she focuses on women's rights. You're going to see, according to her foundation, that she joined this movement, which was, what they wanted to do was to make sure that our legislatures were 50-50, right? To elect more women, especially women of color, to run for office. First, to encourage them to run for office, and of course, to get them elected. And according to the foundation, the campaign did not reach its goal of 50-50, but did significantly increase the number of women representatives. And if we still need to talk about the need of this movement, we just have to look at our Congress today, which is still not 50-50, right? We want proof that there's still gender discrimination. We just have to look at our list of elected officials. And that's something that Huerta has been working on for decades. Again, this is quoting the New York Historical Society Museum and Library. So as a result of her singular character and position, she played a critical role in advocating for women's laborers. She fought for gender equality, educated male leadership about unique issues women workers face, such as childcare, sexual harassment, and gender equality policies. This advocacy led Dolores to connect with the feminist movement, and she's gonna become a speaker for the National Organization of Women. She helped found the Coalition of Labor Union Women. So she was very, very involved in women's rights. She is very involved in women's rights. And I like how this summarizes her position. She was the only woman in the group who, in that group of 10 people, which of the 9 men could really speak to the needs of women? It was her. It was her that literally addressed the main issues that half of the employers, right, the half of the members of this union were struggling with. So it is really incredible the role that Dolores Huerta plays. And in the movie, in the documentary, they say this, and it really stuck with me. And the idea that representation matters, I couldn't say it better. Imagine these women, right? At the time, women had no voice. So Huerta's presence in those, leading those marches, speaking to huge crowds, being in charge of this organization, made it okay for women, for daughters, for mothers, for wives to join the movement. It made it okay. Before that, it wasn't. And having that woman in the front, you know, leading this movement made it okay. And imagine what her presence, her fearlessness, her leadership itself, the impact that it had, not only in the farm workers, women and girls, but women everywhere. She was a leading female, not only for the farm workers, right? It was for the nation. And I found this picture, and it's so contradictory because this is a little girl that is already marching. She's seeing that she has this power, that she can make a difference. She's believing this. But at the same time, look at the names on the posters, right? A contradiction, right? So I thought this was very meaningful. So Dolores Huerta is this extraordinary female, unique female at the time, that is leading this organization that has become extremely powerful and extremely efficient. And the fact that she could mobilize, right? We talk about it, 17 million people to join this boycott for things that they're not really involved in, right? I understand the farm workers, but these other people in other states across the nation, people that never had stepped on a farm before, they're joining this movement and supporting the cause. So that was pretty amazing. And then again, the representation, right, for all the women out there, but even for the men. I want to talk about this because representation matters. I want you to think about what I mentioned about farm workers as second-class citizens, right? Many of them were illiterate, many of them immigrants, powerless. I mean, the way they were treated in the field, right? Being told, being shown that they had no value to this country, to this work. And suddenly they're being invited to march. They're being invited to speak at rallies. Many of them, again, didn't know how to read, but they sat there and protested and fought for their rights. So the movement, Dolores Huerta, gave a voice not only to women, but also to men. It gave them agency, gave them a platform to defend their own rights, to express their discontent, to speak truth to power. And that was pretty amazing. And just as I want you to notice this little thing here, just to talk about how true it was, the discrimination, the struggles that these men and women face in the fields. The average life expectancy of a farm worker at the time was 49 years old. These people were dying of overwork, of all the chemicals that they were being sprayed with on the daily. So what did the union accomplish? Why is the work of Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez so extraordinary? Hope you remember some of the conditions that we talked about, right? They couldn't report any, transgression, any abuse, any of the things that were being imposed on them. They worked these 14-hour days at times, 7 days a week. They were not offered any rest periods during the time they work. They had no benefits, right? Again, many of them got sick out of all the chemicals that they were breathing daily, and they had no way to receive medical care unless they pay out of pocket. And of course, based on the wages that they were receiving, that was very hard to do. By the time the union had established itself and negotiated with the growers and changed the life of thousands and hundreds of thousands of farm workers, they had seniority, job security. They couldn't be fired without a cause, not because you complained about the boss. They had 9-hour work days, 5.5 days a week. They got a rest period every 4 hours. They had, at the time, this is when the union was establishing itself, they had the beginnings of healthcare, welfare, vacations, and they finally got the basics, right? The toilets, the fresh water, the protective equipment against insecticides. So the work of the union, the work of Chavez and Huerta truly transformed the agricultural movement. And I think most of us are familiar with this work. But what I've noticed is that almost no one, and maybe this, I'm just being prejudiced because that's my experience, but I had no idea. I had never heard of Dolores Huerta and her role in modern day environmental activism. I never knew. So through this research, and I really like this quote from the Pesticide Action Network of North America. They talk about how Huerta and her union were key elements. If you're older, you do remember DDT and how it was used to many things, right? And how it's now banned out loud, right? Because it was causing such horrible side effects on the people that used it. Well, it was Huerta and the farm worker union that stopped this from being in our fruits and our vegetables and our teas and our water, because there's the problem of the runoff, right? The drift, the pesticide drift. They were the ones that warned the world. So Dolores Huerta did not start environmental activism. At the time, there was the environmental activism was starting. However, when people thought about saving the world, what they were talking about was saving the forests, the trees, the animals. Nobody really was thinking about what was being put in these crops. And who could testify to that? The people that were working among those pesticides daily, who were seeing their kids being born without arms, without legs, who were feeling their bodies, burning and getting sick and losing their sight, and just seeing the effects, getting cancer at rates that was not normal, right? They were the ones seeing these effects. And they're the ones that warned the world, look, right now it's us, but this food, these vegetables are ending up in your plates. What do you think is happening then? So when we talk about the work of environmental activism to regulate these substances, we owe a lot of that to Huerta and Chavez and the union. I never knew that. I don't know how many of you knew that. Maybe you're more intelligent and well-educated than I was. But this was a shock for me. In that area, there is when she was being interviewed for another interview for the documentary, she's asked about this. She is asked about how the documentary deals with our environmental racism and environmental justice. And she talks about, yes, of course, we have to heal Mother Earth, right? We're supposed to protect it. But we're also supposed to make sure that the food we eat is safe, right? But she still talks about the farm workers, how they're the ones being sprayed up on the farms, how many of them are dying, how many of them are being poisoned through this work. And one of the leaders of the documentary talks about a very important point. He's not Dolores Huerta, but I had to mention it. He talks about environmental justice and gives the example of Flint, Michigan. And I had to include it because this is such a big deal, right? He uses Flint, Michigan as an example of how environmental contamination, toxic dumps, pesticide spraying is mainly affecting communities of color, mainly affecting the poor, right? And they are claiming the same argument that the people of Michigan were talking about at the time, right? If this had happened, if this pesticide, toxic dumps, environmental contamination was happening in white middle-class areas, somebody will stop it. But because it is affecting communities of color, marginalized communities, then somehow it's okay. So it is a fact that most of the communities that live near toxic waste sites, and of course the farm workers that still live with pesticide threats every day, are people of color. And I found this document, it's linked, and in the full document is linked to this. I'm not gonna have time to go over everything, but they talk about how the mortality rate, the occupational disease rate of farm workers is 50 times higher than the second place industry, right? 3 times as high as the average rate of all industries in California, all industries. How people because of economic reasons, use the wrong poisons, the wrong places. There's a lot of disregard for the health of the workers to maximize profits. She, in this document, and this is an old document, but she gave, at the time when she was fighting for again, to stop this, she was giving statistics about how many children were being poisoned by this, how many cases of kids being born with this abnormality or with cancer, or all of these things are happening to adults and children around these communities. It's very powerful to read. She talks about how it was because the people that they were representing are the ones seeing all the effects of the pesticides firsthand, right? So she talks about at this time, this is in September 2014, they are able to stop the use of certain chemicals here in the US, but there are other countries in the world which are still using these chemicals, and the people that are still getting sick, still dying of cancer, still being born with deformities. And she also, continues the work of trying to move the regulation of pesticides from the Department of Agriculture, which according to her hasn't done much of a good job, to the Health and Human Services. So to the protection and the benefit of people, right? Because it's not a business, right? It should be taking care of the people around this. So I want you to picture, so after hearing all of this, I really want you, so I already asked you to see Huerta's story through the lenses of her womanhood, her nationality, right, her culture, but I want you to picture her like this, across these business owners. And one of the things that she challenged and she really changed was the view that people had about farmers. People were, when her organization started, people were afraid to challenge or to join the effort because they pictured these farmers as, your neighbors, this wife and husband with their kids working on their fields, right? And Huerta comes in and says, no, that's not the case. These are big businesses that have 40,000 employees, that have bought all these little farms, that are making a lot of money, that have bought politicians and sheriffs, and they have all this power, investing, a lot of money to put people that will elect them to be able to do all that they're doing right now. So she literally debunked that idea of the small farmer not being able to pay more to the farm worker because, they're just a family-owned business. So they're agribusinesses, that's what she calls them. And she's sitting, I just want you to try to imagine this. This woman sitting, the only woman sitting in front of a group of powerful white business owners, right? And she's negotiating with them. And I want you to think about history in itself. So the unionists started the strike in 1965. What is happening around this time? I want you to place yourself historically, right? Just 20 years before we had seen the Sutur riots. If you didn't know, it was a period of violence against brown people, especially Mexicans, but other groups too. 1955, 1957, 65, 61, 65. We're talking about the civil rights movement. We're talking about people desegregating schools. We're talking about Rosa Parks, the freedom riders, trying to segregate cafes and libraries and pools. When I'm talking about the racism and the sexism that Dolores Huerta must have experienced during this time, I'm not making this up. We're talking about a segregated America still, right? We're talking about the MLK assassination. So place this woman in its historical context and imagine the courage and the skills and the intelligence and the leadership that she must have had in order to sit there and be the only woman and negotiate and confront and challenge not only the white men in front of her, but even the own leaders of her organization that she helped establish, the members of her organization that many of them did not believe it was the role of a woman to be where she was. Imagine that kind of shocking behavior for a Mexican-American woman to be in this position in a male-dominated culture. among the racial majority of the time, where women were not supposed to be active or assertive in public, especially brown women. So imagine, right? This we're talking about when we talk about segregated America. Don't forget that Mexicans were also part of the segregated America, right? They were part of the Black-only facilities. So there is this brown woman, twice divorced, living in sin, right? According to her own faith, a mother of 11, the only woman in the movement, a few of the women leaders in the world, in that country, and she's sitting in front of this group of men and is telling them what they need to change. Imagine the resentment of losing power to this union led by Hispanic people, and especially one led by a woman. She's just breaking stereotypes left and right. She's breaking the mold. She was way before her time when she was doing this. It's just incredible the amount, the extent of the work that she did and the challenge. And this is why I had you to think about her nationality, her origin, her religion, her gender. The work that she did is extraordinary in itself. But when you put it into context, through what she did, is just to leave one speechless. And as you can see, that's very hard for me to do. And her work did not stop there. Again, she fought for LGBTQ rights, and she continues to do that. She talks about eradicating ignorance, homophobia, stopping, children being bullied, women still suffering hate crimes, right? Because people are prejudiced. She really has led a decades-long fight to engage Latino voters and engage them in democracy. She helped, she had these wonderful relationships with people like Robert Kennedy. She helped him elect him in California as a presidential candidate before he was murdered. She fought to elect Hillary Clinton, Jerry Brown, Gray Davis, Hilda Solis. Like, she has really made a big role in politics. So her reach and environmental justice, women's rights, farm workers, politics, LGBTQ rights, it's just incredible. And because of all of this, she has received multiple awards, and I'm not gonna read them. They will be in the presentation, but she does have 4 schools named after her, a couple of high schools. She was elected to this Hall of Fame, to that Hall of Fame. She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Obama. So she has really done incredible things. And I think that lately she has been starting to get some of the recognition that she deserved. She had to wait until she was 92 years old. And again, as educators, I don't think we're doing a good job teaching our students about this. I know that at least I wasn't. And I'm running out of time, but I want to talk about the last box. Remember, there were these 3 boxes, and I already talked to you about these other 3. We have 1 left over, and that's activism and what it means for you. Now, I want to start this section with this quote by her. Be angry about injustice. Use your skills to make a world a better place. And here, where is the definition of identity and the role you play, in your society comes in. When Dolores Huerta actually wrote about the challenges that she suffered as a single mother, as a mother of 11, the sacrifices she had to make, in the document her children talk about, being left with people from the movement, people sometimes that they didn't know while she went to do this or to do that. She talks about abandoning them frequently to do this work, but she talks about working for a cause greater than them. Working for a cause greater than them. And I think this is like what the definition of identity that I was trying to point out earlier, right? What is your role? And when you find yourself within this role, and when you see how your actions are really impacting countless people. How can you stop, right? And this is what she confronted when she was doing this work. She struggled a lot, she overcame a lot, but it was to make the world a better place. Now, the call for you, right? The call for me. If you're feeling inspired by the work of this woman, how do we get involved, especially like after hearing this live and understanding, I don't know about you, but after hearing her life, it's like, oh my God, I can never do this. I cannot sacrifice my family and my husband and my career, and I cannot go live in poverty to do this, right? So after seeing a life like this of activism, it's so hard to find a place for us because many of us won't be willing to live this kind of life, right? But the point is that there are other easier ways to do this. If running for office is not your thing, if being a full-time activist like she was is not your thing, there are other ways. And don't tell me, oh, but I don't have the skills, or oh, but I'm too old or too young. Let me introduce you to, to this girl. I think all of you know her, right? Greta Thunberg. I think most of you know this. She started at 11, and by 17, she had earned a Nobel Prize, right? Or maybe you want to talk about this 90-year-old. There is really no excuse about what can we do, because we're not being called to spend our lives doing activism. If you can, that's your calling, that's a great thing, but there are easier ways. Here are some ideas. Just consider what you're passionate about. Educate yourself about those things. Follow those things in social media and the news. Focus on what's happening in your community, right? Get involved in your community. Engage in community service. Create public awareness. I mean, you're spending all this time educating yourself, learning about those things. Just tell others. If you cannot dedicate your life to do this, maybe somebody you told this will be inspired and do it, and you already reach and change a life there. Get creative and have fun while trying to educate others. And find people that think like you, right? Donate time and money to your cause. Raise money for that cause if you don't have it. Write a letter to a company that you disagree with, right? Like, do you think that, I don't know, the worker at such company is not getting the pay that they deserve or the working conditions that they deserve? Just tell them and boycott those companies if you don't agree with them. I have several companies that I do not visit and I do not shop from. And believe me, it hasn't been hard. And I've made sure that I do respect that. Work on your own habits and beliefs, right? Change starts with us. Maintain an attainable lifestyle that aligns with your new views. Support or join nonprofit organizations working for a change. And of course, show up to community events and protest if you can. But I do hope, my only concern really is that I make justice to the incredible story of this woman. So I hope that regardless of how I presented this or how fast I spoke or, you know, my accent, whatever it is, I just hope that truly you got to savor just a bit of this extraordinary woman.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Sandra.
Awesome. Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you, Sandra.